Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, the niche sports connoisseur. We are dishing it up hot and we are ready for some college basketball action. This weekend has a ton of games. It is magnificent. 10-game main slate over on DraftKings. That's going to be the primary focus of tonight's show. There's also a 9-game afternoon slate and an 8-game night slate. You already know, if you're a member of the FTN community, we're going to have coverage for all three of those slates via Discord, Hubbub, and all kinds of projections, one for each slate. We'll also have FanDuel coverage as well. There's a great slate over on FanDuel. There's a bunch of injury news as usual. And just overall, there's some great contests as well. Even though the NBA All-Star break is over and we expected there not to be a whole lot of goodness here with the prize pools until closer to Selection Sunday. We still have a 5K to first GBP. That's worth getting out of bed for, for some of you NBA, NFL guys. We also have qualifier number 39 at the $30 level and qualifier number 40 at the $250 level for the Mania. That is a flagship tournament that takes place every single year on DraftKings. Still plenty of opportunities there to qualify if you haven't done so already. And of course, there's all kinds of other things, the 33, the 5, the 12, and everything in between. The afternoon has a 1K to first, which is decent, a 1K to night or to first on the night slate. So there's plenty of opportunities here to throw in and just get your knowledge up when it comes to college basketball. Before we get any further, I am going to ask if you could find it in your heart to please hit that like button. If you're watching on YouTube, especially if you're watching on X/Twitter, please mosey on over to YouTube if you can. Dropping that like button helps us a tremendous amount. Following the channel and turning on those notifications so you know whenever the CBB Super Show comes on air, you won't miss a single solitary second. And we are absolutely on fire. The last couple of days especially have been great. We switched up and did some daytime shows on Tuesday and Wednesday. Got some great feedback about that. I feel very positive about where we stand there. We're still going to be doing the Friday night show as well. We're going to expand out that content and have some further shows here the closer we get to conference tournaments. And I have a ton planned for previews of all those. Betting opportunities galore. We will not let you down. Speaking of betting, Mike Randall's betting show will be taking place tomorrow morning. I believe that is at 10 a.m. EST, 7 a.m. PST. Mike Randall dishing the goods there. A ton of games to choose from. Just be ready there because he is going to have it all. If you're new to the show, what we do here, we cover the DFS slate primarily from DraftKings, but we do give love to our FanDuel players. I've been playing over there a lot because their pricing is pretty soft for the most part. And we do the tried and true method, game by game analysis. It's the only way to do it. It really is when it comes to college basketball. And then we are going to go through, talk about it a little bit, give any of the core plays that we might be thinking, any prize picks, underdog betting opportunities, and then we'll get out of here at the end. Wishing you well. We're after those green screens and window trips, folks. That is what we are doing here, and we are going to have the best weekend of the season. I am very confident in that, and tremendous support from all of you guys continually, which I really, truly do appreciate very, very much. Brian David, what's up, bro? Appreciate you coming on, man. You are very, very, it's good to see you. It's good to see all of you, actually. So let's get into this right away. Lots going on. Diving in first game, I'm going to pull up my projections. That's the other thing, kind of new to the show here. We've been doing projections for 2 seasons, but started pulling those up on the show as well, kind of giving you guys an idea of, hey, what do we do at FTN? What do we offer? Besides just articles and breakdowns, we have those daily projections for every single slate. We have that Discord coverage where we are strategizing and breaking news and talking about starting lineups, and just that part of it goes a long way. FTN.com. The pricing page is linked below here on this very video. Check us out. We have had a couple of new viewers sign up and become members of our community here this week alone. I am appreciative of that, and they are already seeing those results, and it makes me very, very happy to see. All right, having some trouble there. We're back. It was a little frozen. Let me get my projection screen pulled up here, and then we'll get into this goodness. layout number 7. Lucky number 7. There it is. Let's do it. All right, first game on the slate, Tennessee, the Vols versus Texas A&M. The Aggies are currently 1.5-point favorites because they're at home, I guess. Total of 130.5. That is a interesting game. There's we went from some high-scoring slates. Now we're looking at some low-scoring slates here. The afternoon and the night slate especially have some more DFS-friendly games. So this is going to be what I believe a lower-scoring slate. And we tend to do better with those. It's a little bit more of an edge for us when you don't have just these plug-and-play sub-5K players that are all going to go 5 and 6X. And you have to score 300 like it's an NBA slate to try and min cash. So I do project this to be a lower scoring one, and that is a good thing. We have a ton of games that look just like this one, a lower total of 130.5. Let's take a peek at the team page here. Got the implied there, 66 for Texas A&M, 64.5 for the Vols. Not a very intriguing game whatsoever, but we can find something to use here perhaps. On the Texas A&M side, Wade Taylor, man, he has been very, very cheap, but he's just not the Wade Taylor of yesteryear, one that we were accustomed to paying $9K plus for, and we did it happily. We very rarely faded him the last month and a half of the season, and mini stacks of Texas A&M were very profitable. Boots Radford, of course, Wade Taylor, and last year's version of Manny Obasake, who's just not here right now. Only 7.3K for Wade Taylor. I was all over him. Against Arkansas, he came out very well for us, and then went right back to him against Mississippi State. But, man, he could not find his shot. 4 of 14, turned it over a bunch of times, only put together 22.5 fantasy points. Didn't pay off. Now his price goes from 7 to 7.3. It's still an intriguing price. It well and truly is. GPP-wise, I could definitely get down with some Wade Taylor, but we're just not going to be able to roster him in our main lineups right now. I think it's come to that point where he's just not going to be rosterable as a main team play, and this just might be who he is. Trying to chase the fact that, hey, this is 9K player we're so used to. High-usage guy, gets buckets, fills up the box score. It's been over 2 months. We're just not seeing that same version of Wade Taylor. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what the reason is, but we have to stop rostering him at this point in our main lineups because he's just killing us. Thankfully, that day, the Wade Taylor slate was very profitable because it was low scoring, and Taylor's 23 was actually a lot higher scoring than a ton of busts there. So we got away with the Wade Taylor play there. Not so sure that I feel as confident in it this time, especially against the Vols, who are one of the better defenses in the SEC and the whole country, for that matter. Zurich Phelps, also extremely cheap. He's only 6'5", so if you feel like you need to go with an Aggies play, it would be Zurich at that price of 6'5". He has been seeing his minutes kind of stagnant here lately. We've only seen him use clips the 30-minute mark once in the last 5 games. Phelps, that's something we've been accustomed to with him all during his time at SMU, and then early in this part of the year when Taylor was banged up, playing 34, 35 minutes with ease. That's just not happening now, and that has caused him to be a very tough play as well. And you see turnover 7 against Mississippi State, 4 against South Carolina, 3 against Georgia. He has just been turning it over a ton. Doesn't hurt you as much on DraftKings as it does on FanDuel, but still negative points there. His assist to turnover ratio right now is absolutely atrocious. It's very hard to feel confident in Zurich Phelps. And for that matter, after Phelps and Taylor, there's just not going to be anybody that's really rosterable here. Sometimes it's Anderson Garcia. Sometimes it's Pharrell Payne. Sometimes it's Solo Washington. Very rarely is it Henry Coleman. All of those various forwards that they use. It does feel like a game we could see a spike in minutes for Anderson Garcia, grabbing rebounds, but he's just not a factor on offense. And he's high enough at 5'4" where he can do some real damage to your lineup there if he doesn't get up over 20 fantasy points, which you can see we don't have him projected there. I did go through before the show, kind of refined everything, put in the minutes that I felt pretty confident in with the news that we have. Even on the higher end at 26, he's just not playable of an asset for us. The only one we can really truly look to is Zurich Phelps at 6'5", and you can see he's pretty close to 4X there on our screen, but just not a very appealing option there. Definitely a low-end look. Last guy in, perhaps. Definitely has upside typically, but I don't think he has it here, even though they're at home against the Vols. And we've seen the Vols have some clunkers, have some stinkers in odd spots, but I don't think it happens here. On the Tennessee side, Zakai Zeigler, he's expensive. This is another one of those slates. I feel like every time there's a show and we have some potential value, we haven't had the pay-ups to really hang our hat on. And the way that DraftKings is breaking these slates up, especially on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, it's pushing some of the, for lack of a better term, hotter pay-ups like a Janai Broom, like a Cooper Flag to the afternoon night slates. So we're not getting them on the main slate. So we're having these pay-ups that are okay. Colin Murray Boyle, Zakai Ziegler, some of these slates lately with those players where they just haven't been that great. We've had a lot of success in the 7 and 8K range, but even now on this particular slate, we're seeing a lot of guys who are ballooned in price, and DK's done a nice job of a lot tougher, tighter, stricter pricing on this slate. And I'm one of the rare birds that likes it that way. Feel like you find more of an edge there, and you can get over mistakes a lot easier. But Zakai Ziegler being one of the higher price players here definitely feels like a lack of overall DFS firepower on this particular slate. Now, he's always worth a look because he's going to play 37, 38 minutes, potentially the entire game, has the ball in his hands a lot, grabs a lot of assists, does enough. His shooting has improved. He's gotten a little bit more consistent. We've been waiting for that for a year. It's happened. But just not in love with the spot here for him. We do have some value at our fingertips here in the Iowa State game, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. So it's possible to roster him. He will be lower owned. I don't necessarily like Ziegler as a GBP look, though, because I don't feel like he necessarily has that consistent upside to win you a tournament. He almost becomes more of a single entry play because his floor is pretty steady, but he doesn't pop off for 40 plus as often as you might think or as much as you would like. So definitely on board with Ziegler, but he's a secondary play for me. You can see we do have a couple of players here projected extremely well. Felix Akpara at 6'4", front court options against Texas A&M, even though they don't necessarily produce all that consistently from a DFS perspective. They have been pretty good on the glass. They have been pretty good defensively. I haven't gotten in the habit of targeting against them all that often, but I have to notice what Akpara has been doing for Tennessee. Pretty much a non-factor for a lot of the non-con, and he's been good, productive, but from a DFS perspective, he hasn't really mattered. You don't see him on the optimal lineup very often. And I know he does have the questionable tag. We'll see if he ends up playing or not. From what I've read, it seems like it's a pretty good chance that he plays, but we'll see. Every time we go into it, a guy practices or he warms up, oh, he's going to play. He ends up sitting out. Guy doesn't practice at all, doesn't warm up, not even dressed half the time. Oh, he's playing and starting. So we'll see how that works out. But assuming Akpara plays and starts, he has a very interesting look here at 6'4". Played 34 minutes against Vanderbilt, 33 against Kentucky. Back-to-back games well over 30. And you'll see at 3 straight games, he's been under 20 fantasy points. So he hasn't lit the world on fire by any means. But I do think he's an interesting look here as an overall option in single entry or GBP, assuming he starts and is fine. You also see Jordan Gainey there at 5'4". He's a semi-value at this price. We've been accustomed to having him cheaper throughout the season. The latter half of SEC play, he's been above 6K several times because of some injuries that the Vols have dealt with. But even as they've gotten healthy at his position, his minutes have still remained. He is a offensive dynamo. They rely on him heavily. Chaz Lanier is getting harassed. Zakai Ziegler has been consistent lately, but they've needed that third option to kind of emerge offensively. And it's kind of Ben Gainey, who has taken a ton of shots, not hitting the threes as much, but he's finding a way to get to the bucket. And he's also contributing a lot in rebounds, assists, and other categories. So he's become a little more safer play. In the past, he's been more of a scoring-only option. Now he's been doing more than that. So you see at 5'4", he does project fairly well at 27-ish minutes over 4X, definitely a look. And then you have Igor Milicic and Chaz Lanier, both over 7K. Not too keen on Chaz Lanier. He is more scoring dependent and a little bit of a higher price at almost 8K. He did have that big game there against Vanderbilt, kind of eked out that win. Vandy played them so tough in both games this year, beat them once, lost to them once closely. 21-8 for Chaz there, took 16 shots. You can see when he's making his shots, he's going to make value or get close. When he's not making those shots, he's just not going to have much success. Too high of a price for me at 7-8. If he was 6'9" still, I might consider it. And then you have Milicic, who I do wonder if Felix ends up being out. I think we see a spike in his ownership, pushing him closer to 30 minutes. He's been rock solid. Had that 54 in the close win over Missouri, which was one of the most impressive games I've ever seen him play, dating back to his Charlotte days. He is still reasonably cheap at 7'4" and very much playable there. You see right around 28 minutes, he does project right at value. Anything above that, he would become a very strong play if Akpara can't go. You'd see some additional minutes for a guy like Cade Phillips, Bishop Boswell, but Igor's going to have to play a lot more. And anything we get into the 30s, 32, 33 minutes perhaps, you can see he just shoots up the board. So very obvious play there depending on how that news shakes out. But as of now, I do project a part of play. And the last slate that had a bunch of injuries, Providence, Georgetown, that one, we actually got 100% rate on how we projected the injuries to go and shake out. We were right. So we're due a bad slate for injury projections, but right now I do think Felix plays. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Oregon versus Wisconsin. Much better total, 155.5. And yes, that is the highest total on the slate. Wisconsin, an 8.5-point favorite. The Badgers have been lighting the world on fire. Oregon, maybe not as much, but Oregon can definitely get down. We have been burned by Nate Biddle a ton this year, but we stayed with him the last two slates, and man, he has paid off. Huge games from Nate Biddle, and he's done it without going over that 30-minute mark. We know he's kind of in that 28 to 30-minute range typically. Does have his work cut out for him going up against this Wisconsin front court, but he has been absolutely phenomenal, and he's been, quite frankly, severely underpriced. And he's been kind of an easy click in there. Now he's priced up at 8.6. We got him at 6.6 against Rutgers. Rutgers interior has been just absolutely gobsmacked every single game this year. And then against Iowa, who we know, I say it every time, Kamari McGee told us they don't defend. They really don't. Biddle absolutely walloped them there as well. Back-to-back games over 40, back-to-back double-doubles. Definitely gets harder a road matchup against Wisconsin, but we're talking about an 8.6K price point. That's tough. I think we've all enjoyed the success that Biddle has given us the last two games. I think we have to pull back a little bit here. Tournaments, if you want to heat check them, sure, but I definitely worry about him getting a bad whistle, ending up in some foul trouble, and just really having one of those, 20-minute, 18 fantasy point slates that's just going to absolutely bury you, regardless of what your other spots do. You just can't take that sub 30 from him at 8.6, and he's way too volatile for me here in this spot at that price. If he was still 6.8, I wouldn't even bat an eye. I wouldn't care about matchups. You guys know DVP is a very big priority for me, but at that price, I have to really take a step back. Same with TJ Bamba. We've been riding with him. Projections have loved TJ Bamba a lot lately, but now he's priced up at 7.5. It's very difficult to get there. And you can see nobody really projecting all that well for Oregon in this spot, even with a higher total. And the implied shows them scoring, around 73.5, Wisconsin getting 82. So there's definitely going to be some points here scored. But I do worry about Oregon in the spot. Earlier game on the road definitely looks tough. Keyshawn Bartholomew has been a solid look on FanDuel for a few slates now. He's been kind of a mediocre play. He is cheap enough at 5.3. If he's going to play 30-plus minutes, he is the best projected Oregon play, as you can see here. So definitely don't mind that for some exposure. Also like Kwame Evans, if this does play out as Nate Biddle getting into foul trouble or any reduction in minutes below 26 to 27, those minutes typically go directly to Kwame Evans. We see Supreme Cook scoop them up. We'll even see a random 1-2 minute period for Mookie. But Kwame Evans is the most talented second unit player on this team for my money. And I think he could be starting on a number of any other programs. He's only 3.8K. If he pushes closer to that 20-minute mark, he can and will pay off. So a GBB value in Kwame Evans that nobody's going to be talking about, nobody's going to roster, but do not be surprised if he has a pretty solid number here if Nate Biddle gets himself into foul trouble. Also, Jackson Shellstad, 7.2. It's a little bit of a cheaper price for him for what he's been doing, the minutes he's been playing. He doesn't project all that well for us, but watching their games, this will be one that I could see him getting into it with John Tanya, John Blackwell, kind of a back and forth scoring session between the guards. Shellstad would be the one to look at there and not necessarily Bamba. I think he's going to have a tougher outing here, at least against the Wisconsin perimeter defense, which has been suspect at times. Don't get me wrong. On the Wisconsin side, John Blackwell, we had 1,000,000% Blackwell. I mean, if they're not pricing him correctly, it's very easy to just plug him in. He's had a couple of down games prior to the explosion against Illinois, came through in a big way there. Now he's hit over 30 in 2 of his last 4, priced at 6.3. He's gone up a little bit, but not enough to push us off. as far as a main team look goes, single entry, we're just going to keep rolling with Blackwell. You see top projected player there with his 31 minutes, kind of tentatively penciled in at 27-ish fantasy points, which puts him at 4.2x. Very easy look. You don't have to be worried either. Some might look at it and say he's a single entry cash play, not necessarily a large field tournament play that's going to win you, or be optimal in that case. But that's not true. He had a 50 earlier this season against Iowa. He's had a couple of 40s earlier in the season against non-con competition. He can get really hot. The problem is John Tanya has been unbelievable here the last half of the conference schedule and has led to a reduction in scoring for everybody else. But we have seen Blackwell put it on and turn things up a little bit. And he's contributing a lot in the rebounding categories, assists, and everywhere else as well. So Blackwell at 6'3" is a easily the strongest play in this game. Excuse me. So that's an easy one. Expect him to be relatively chalky. We know the deal there. Then the decision on John Tanya at 9.8. Like, we're going to have to probably pay for somebody, right? We're going to have this value available to us. Who do we feel most trusting of? Probably not so much Nate Biddle. We've had some of the, Zakai Zeigler games that have been good. We just talked about Ish Leggett for Pitt. It's got a great matchup on paper. I got a good matchup on paper. Hunter Salas, who can break the slate. Javon Small, who can break the slate. But really, Dawson Garcia is probably our best overall pay-up. And then you have John Tanya, I think, really right behind him there, priced at 9.8. Makes a lot of sense. I think a Wisconsin double stack here, a Blackwell Tanya can work out very well, soaking up all that offensive usage that's going to come their way. Definitely a lighter slate for me on plays like Nolan Winter and Steven Crowell, who have had some nice games. Crowell had that 40 spot against Illinois. Morez Johnson gone, interior. Like, that was just one of those ones. We even said it in the Discord, like, damn, if we had the PMR to get Steven Crowell, he's probably going to break it. Most of us had Trey White and John Blackwell, weren't willing to readjust. We ended up staying with it. It worked out. But Crowell, of course, had the huge game. I would pull back off there. 6.6 is a little bit too expensive for me to play Crowell going up against Biddle. Somebody's going to get into some foul issues there, whether it's Biddle or Crowell. I'm not willing to take that risk. I'll just stick with John Blackwell myself. I will get some Tanya exposure at 9.8. As far as, how much value pieces from the Iowa State game I'm going to use, makes a lot of sense to play John there in the large field tournaments. And I think it is a little bit sneaky to play both John Blackwell and John Tanya, because I don't think a lot of people will do it. I think most people will gravitate towards Blackwell, and then the people in the large field tournaments will fade Blackwell for a leverage spot, pay up for Tanya, and hope that he puts up a 40 or 50, which is definitely doable, possible, all things that can happen. But both of them could easily combine for 100 plus points. That's a real outcome that could happen here. Nolan Winter is very cheap. He's a non-con hero. I hate to say it, Nolan. I hate to do it to you, but he was so good in the non-con. He struggled in his minutes reduction. Carter Gilmore has just played well enough to really puncture Nolan Winter's overall minutes. He played 28 against Purdue, which was great. That game was close, high scoring. He looked pretty good overall. But for the most part, we're seeing him play low 20s, late teens. It's just not enough. He is very cheap. If he falls below 5K, the conversation is going to change a little bit, and we're going to be looking at him as a guy that, hey, he can give us 18 to 20. We feel good there. At 5'2", we're not quite there yet, so I would take a down game for him. But those minutes from Carter Gilmore, they're wrecking Nolan Winter and causing him to play less. And they're ended up splitting, actually, and both playing basically 20 minutes. Gilmore's 3.8. He's okay. He's been a decent enough value. We don't need him today because of the injury news that I keep alluding to in the Cyclones game. So we don't really need to get too cute here with any of these cheapies. Kamari McGee, guys like that just aren't going to be necessary. And you guys know with Max Klesman, I'm almost never rostering him at any price. 5K is okay. He does have it in him to put up 30, but generally speaking, I can't recall a single slate where I've ever thought, man, I didn't roster Max Klesman. I can't win today. But I have had slates where I said I did roster Max Klesman and I can't win today. So it's kind of how I look at there with Max. But Blackwell, no-brainer play, easy peasy. All right, moving on. Let's get to Florida State versus Louisville. Total of 151.5. Louisville 13.5 point favorites. The implied there, Louisville scoring 82 points, 68.5 for Florida State. Let's get that projection screen pulled up. By the way, how's everybody doing? You guys feeling good? Feeling good about what is happening here. I know I am. This is going to be a really big weekend. It's crazy to think that February, like we were just saying, like, oh, January's in the rearview mirror, we feel good, and now February is almost over as well. It's kind of that bitter, get off the screen, bittersweet for me. Like, I don't want the season to ever end. It's just been going so fast, but we're gonna enjoy these last few weeks and months together, grinding out things. So I do want to just kind of shout you guys out for your continued support, but I am a little bit sad and teary-eyed about the realization that it's going to be over soon, and we're going to be talking about green jackets, gold jackets, Happy Gilmore, Masters, all that stuff. All right, let's see. Florida State and Louisville. Now, these two teams, let me get off this. These two teams have played before. December 21st, so approximately 2 months ago, was a 90-76 victory for Louisville on the road. In that one, Rain Smith was absolutely god tier. This is when he's still coming off the bench. He hit 6 of 9 from downtown, 27 real points. Decided Noah Waterman was no longer needed as a starter, and they got Rain Smith into the starting lineup after that. Terrence Edwards had 19, 7, and 8. Monstrous game for him. Chucky Hepburn, 16 points, 8 assists for him as well. And then on the Florida State side, Jameer Watkins had 25 points and 3 assists. Malik Ewan had 17 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. An okay game for him. And then Daquan Davis had 9. So it was a higher scoring game, but a lot of kind of just like mediocre scores. And when you look at the prices for especially Louisville, it's very, very unappealing, even though we do foresee them scoring 80 plus actual points. When you look at it, nobody projects all that great. Abakar Traore off the bench has been a fantasy point per minute monster, and he is only 4.2. So as far as a GPP look goes, I do think he makes some sense there when he's gotten minutes, especially in the first half. I mean, he is literally just quickly putting together 8, 9, 10 fantasy points in the blink of an eye. The problem is he just doesn't get those minutes in the second half. They kind of buckle down and they don't play as much of their bench there. So he has to do a lot of his damage in the first half, a la Jackson McAndrew of Creighton, who we always talk about having to do that. So Traore is a deep GBP bench value piece, but he can pay out at 4.2, please believe. And if he gets around 18 to 20 minutes, he's going to shatter that price. So do not be surprised about that. You see, even at 16 minutes, we have him pretty damn close to value. As far as the starters go, James Scott at 5.7, he's back to a cheap enough price to know he's looking like value once more. We were rostering James Scott with regularity there for pretty much 3 straight weeks. Until he just got too good and his price rose over 6K and he just was not rosterable at that point. He did put together a solid 30 against Notre Dame last time out, 10 point, 10 rebound, double-double. At 5.7, he is very playable at home here against FSU. Definitely one of my favorite Louisville players on this team that is healthy. Would be Corin Johnson otherwise, and still sub 6K makes him an interesting look. He doesn't actually have the upside warranted to win a big GPP, but in single entry, high dollar stuff like that, he's also not going to bottom out very often, and you're generally going to get a 4X number from him at this price, and sometimes 5X. So, barring foul trouble or something unforeseeable, I do think James Scott is more playable than people probably realize, and he does fall into that last man in category, what I always talk about, between 5K and 6K. You end up with that, hey, who can I roster here, last spot, who's a good last man in play? James Scott is definitely a guy. So if you're in that range, you can just have my answer right now. It's going to be James Scott. As for the rest of the starters, Terrence Edwards, it's tough because he's 8.9. Chucky Hepburn is a little cheaper than we've been seeing at 8.8. Javon Hadley 8.2, and then Rain Smith 7.7. Just really steep prices, and that's kind of the theme of the slate. DK, I've got to give it to them. They have been a lot tougher and tighter on this one, which I like. I prefer this, as opposed to the alternative would be Terrence Edwards being 6K and 90% owned on a 10-game slate. That's not fun for everyone or anyone. He does have that guard forward eligibility. We always harp on that. We love that flexibility that players of that caliber and that designation give us. But that is just a really steep look at almost 9K. Now, he has the upside. We've seen him pop 40s and 50s against lesser competition like Boston College and Miami. But let's not kid ourselves. Florida State isn't exactly, the A team here. You could very easily put together a massive 19, 10, and 6 type of game against them. Makes him an interesting Q play, makes him an interesting 5K to first large field GBP play. So I just don't think people are going to be clicking his name in very often in anywhere other than the deepest of GBPs. So Edwards does have leverage opportunities there, but he's clearly not a main team look at that price. Would rather play Chucky Hepburn. If you're going to force me to play one of the Louisville pay-ups, it would be Hepburn. He has less bottoming out in his logs than Edwards does. Doesn't have the same level of upside, but a very safe option there that's typically going to give you anywhere from 30 to 35. That may be okay on this slate. We're going to see a ton of landmines. What we saw on the last, the 18th was just so much. What was it? The Tuesday slate. All those chalky busts, all the low scores that happened. There was just a tremendous amount of landmines, and I foresee that happening here. So a player like Chucky Hepburn, that's not landmine proof by any means. I mean, he has a 22 in his logs there during a blowout win over Boston College, so he gets a pass from me. But if FSU can keep this anywhere competitive for 3/4 of the game, before they start pulling guys out or it becomes by halftime a complete joke, Hepburn should be able to deliver close to a 4x number at this price point. Probably not much more than that, but when you have other guys in his range dropping 2x, that's going to be a big differential that you can ride on. And you could see at 37 minutes, which may be a little generous, we do have him projected close to value there, 34.38 fantasy points. So I don't hate the idea of using Chucky Hepburn more so than some of the other options in his range that we're going to talk about as we go. Rain Smith, Javon Hadley, Edwards, you can see they just don't project well because they're all priced up. I don't think I've rostered Javon Hadley once this year. He's had some pretty big games, but he still didn't end up on optimal for his big game. So I don't necessarily worry as much about him, which may be a kiss of death. I don't know. On the FSU side, we were all over Malik Ewan on the night slate the other day. Unfortunately, so was everybody else. He was like 45% owned. Had a big game as expected. We enjoyed it, but didn't really move us too much at that ownership. He is, again, over 8K here after a few depressed prices of under 8K, which were just kind of autoplay anytime he's in the 7K range. Certainly worth a look. Didn't do very well on the glass against Louisville last time, which is a bit of a surprise because when you look at Louisville's interior, it's not exactly murderer's row. So Ewan should theoretically have a decent game on the boards, but he didn't last time. So it's hard to trust him there. Last game out, I had his over 8.5 boards, which I thought was a mortal lock, and that didn't happen. He scored a lot, but he missed it. Now at 8.5 boards, I feel really comfortable with the under, of course, so we'll probably hit that over. But we do have him at 16 and 9 on our projections, which is pretty solid. But I'm a little bit less inclined to use Ewan this time like I was the other night. Jameer Watkins, 8.4. It's a reasonable price for him. I'd rather go up to Chucky Hepburn at 8.8. We've seen Watkins be a steady performer on the road, though he has had some clunkers, and I just don't feel as confident, comfortable, great about this Florida State team here like I did last time when they played Miami. Chandler Jackson is a okay value piece at 4.6. He was scoring a bunch of points in the first half last game. He is actually okay if you want to filter him into some of your lineups, but it kind of keeps coming back to, hey, we've got injury news later in the slate. We don't really have a need for Chandler Jackson at 4.6. Going to give us 3x at best, just not necessary. But typically on a slate that's priced this tight, he would be a welcome value. But we do have some injury stuff that we can deal with and kind of work our way through. I believe that jacket belongs to Mr. Gilmore. What a classic. What a classic. I don't know, that dude's probably not alive, but that was just a classic 90s movie. Billy Madison, of course, is alive, but he takes the 9-iron out and bends it. Great movie, man. Great movie. I'm glad you got the reference. Appreciate that. All right, let's move on to the next game here. TCU versus Cincinnati, total of 132.5. Now we're back to the lower totals. Cincy a 6.5-point favorite. TCU games are just turning into such a crummy experience for all involved, even their fans, I got to imagine. The implied here, 63 for them, or about 68.5 for Cincy. We do have some injury news here to potentially have with Seamus Lukosius, who missed last game. I do have the projections here with Seamus out once again. I always go through and do the social media message board rounds before the show just to kind of get an idea of what people are saying and do that deep dive dirty work. Got some passwords and some friends, and they give me some message board access. It does seem like Seamus is trending not to play, so take that for what it is worth. Let's pull up the box score for last time when that happened. So it wasn't Dan Skillings who got the start over him. It was Josh Reed, and that's kind of what we thought there. When the news came out that Seamus was out, we talked about in the Discord, kind of felt like, hey, Josh Reed's been playing mid-20s minutes. Naturally, he'll probably be the one that starts even over Dan Skillings, and that did happen. Slid in there, got into some foul trouble, had a really nice start to the game. I mean, he had like 5 or 6 fantasy points immediately. Then he got into foul trouble, and then he didn't really do a whole lot the rest of the way, but he did play 27 minutes. It was against West Virginia. Really tough environment at West Virginia. They did lose that one by 3. West Virginia's defense is really pretty much marquee at this point. And I kind of give him a do-over or pass on that one. 4 points, 1 board, 3 assists, 1 steal before he eventually fouled out in the 27 minutes. Reed has been hitting threes off the bench and looking pretty confident, but that was just a really tough environment to throw him into. Ironically, off the bench in 21 minutes, Dan Skillings, who was an absolute monster the back half of last year for Cincy and the first 2 weeks of the season once he got healthy and played, 2 weeks for him, I should say. He was a pretty good fantasy asset, but something has happened to him where he's just going through a slump. He's not a sophomore, but it's almost like he's going through this sophomore slump as a junior. But he did have 10 points, 7 rebounds, 2 steals, a block. Honestly, one of the best games he's had in all of conference play. So very interesting and very encouraging to see Dan Skillings have that kind of game. We saw 18 minutes for Tyler Betsy as well. He had a 3. He was fairly productive. Aziz Bandiago was awful. He just couldn't get anything going. Dylan Mitchell played 33 minutes. He wasn't particularly great either. 10 points, 4 rebounds. And then Day Thomas, 13 points, 2 rebounds. Nobody really played all that well. And Jizzle James had 13 points as well. But he was a non-factor a lot of times in the second half especially. So a much easier, I guess, for lack of a better term, game for Cincinnati. And when you look at the way that they are projected with Seamus out, Reed playing around 23, 24 minutes at 3.7. He does project for value once again. A much better matchup for him. He's been a pretty solid 3-point shooter. I think that he has a good chance here to make value at 3.7 as long as Seamus is out. So Reed would ordinarily on a slate like this be a pretty big lock of a value for me personally with Seamus out, assuming that happens. But again, might as well just skip to that game because I keep talking about it. We have injury news in other games that are going to give us just really obvious value that are in an absolute trash matchup, but just the amount of minutes and usage that we expect to get, kind of just have to filter them in and play at least one of them in our main. So Josh Reed's ownership probably goes a lot lower than I think it ordinarily would, but I still like him across the board and I'm going to get some exposure somewhere. And he still might make my main lineup. Honestly, we'll see how it goes. I might decide I need Dawson Garcia. I might need, John Tonje, and then make that happen with some of these values. But Josh Reed is definitely a pretty good player and somebody who has another 2 seasons left, I believe, could really turn into one of the faces of Cincinnati next year, depending on how everything goes with the transfer portal. So I'm on board with using him. Day Thomas and Jizzle James, both priced at 6 and 7K. They're fine options as well. You can see most of the starting 5 and rotational pieces with Dan Skillings off the bench all project around 3.8. 3.9. So you can definitely get some pieces here of Cincinnati. It's not exactly exciting by any means, but I think that they're going to give us a solid return considering the context of the slate and how low scoring it's probably going to be. Dylan Mitchell at 6.3 is probably one of my favorites in this spot, honestly. TCU does have Ernest Uday in the front court. He finally didn't get into foul trouble and played significant minutes last time out and looked good while doing it. I don't necessarily trust him to do that here. He's been getting into massive foul trouble a lot. And I expect that to be the case here with the way that the Bearcats hit the lane with their driving guards and the way that Dylan Mitchell and Aziz Bandiago are physical on the block. So it seems like once Uday gets into foul trouble, inevitably it's going to be a great opportunity for Dylan Mitchell to get some easy ones down low. And for the same token, Aziz Bandiago as well, who we've had a tremendous amount of success with as a value as these the last couple of games. We jumped off last game, of course, with the price increase, but I do think he's back to being playable in this spot. Dan Skillings is at 4-6 without Seamish there. I don't expect him to start either way, but he always projects pretty decently, right around 21, 22 minutes. 18 fantasy points. We can take that from Skillings. He's definitely a look. And we know he has upside for more. He hasn't shown it as much lately this year, but we definitely know Skillings has that upside and can break a slate. He's done it before, just hasn't done it in the calendar year of 2025. On the TCU side, it's pretty ugly. We mentioned Ernest Uday, higher end. I did project him for 28 minutes. You see, he's pretty close to value at that amount. Really tough for me to sit here and say confidently on the road that's going to happen. He is an interesting look at 6-1 because he does have a lot of upside at that lower price. You see against Texas Tech at home, 32 minutes. He had 11 points, 10 rebounds. He can get after it quickly against a variety of opponents. It's just been that fouling, especially on the road, that's just absolutely dirt napped him continually. So I don't have a lot of faith there, but you do see as far as the TCU options go, he is the top projected play with those minutes. So GBP wise, I think an Uday exposure makes a little bit of sense there. David Punch also played more minutes last game at 4-9. I don't necessarily hate the idea of using him, but that's many lineups down the line, 10 plus before I'm landing there. We did see Trezarian White, who I wonder if we're going to see some chasing going on there. He's only priced at 3.9. He did play 27 minutes, which is the most minutes he's played since, what was my note here? Early January, when he was still getting some spot starts and playing over 30 minutes. He's been off the bench relatively low minutes, under 20 in 4 straight prior to that. Did play 27 in a close game against Texas Tech. He had 3 triples, 4 rebounds, 27.5 fantasy points. Now he's priced at 3.9. I'm wondering if people chase. I'm not going to be one of those. Just don't trust him. And it's not even that I don't trust him necessarily. It's that I don't trust the rotation and those minutes for him. There are just too many other pieces on TCU. They're very deep. We've seen Jace Posey break out a little bit. We've seen Micah Robinson give them good minutes. We've seen Malik Diallo give them minutes. Brennan Wenzel is healthy. He played 30 and 27 minutes in each of the last 2 games. Then he only played 17 against Texas Tech because of how hot and how good Trezarian White was playing. So it's a little bit of a hot hand situation there for TCU and Coach Dixon. I just don't trust that whatsoever. He is cheap, yes. If you're running multiple lineups, you have a value piece to get some of the other payups, fine. But this isn't even a slate where we have a Janai Broom where I feel inclined. If there was Janai Broom, if there was Cooper Flagg, these various Keyshawn Hall, who I love, who continues to do us well, then I'd feel inclined and say, you know what, I'll chase Trezarian White because it doesn't really matter what Traz White does. If I get those 3 payups with him in this Iowa State value, then I feel pretty damn good. But I don't have that same level of confidence in the payups available to us on this slate for me to be rostering Traz White. We're just not going to be forced to. If he goes off again, kudos to those who used him, but I just don't see that happening. Right now, I have him tentatively 22-ish minutes, which is right in line with what we've been seeing from him. And still right around 3.5, 3.6, somewhere in there. He's okay. Definitely not a top value, but I am interested to see where his ownership ends up shaking out here after that game. Because we know Traz White has been a pretty solid basketball player throughout the course of his collegiate career, and he can get it done. And he was a starter, and they brought him in via the portal for a reason. Of course, he was at UNC Wilmington. You remember last year, 6th best usage rate in the country, top 10 shot rate, continually putting up big numbers. He had that game against Michigan where he held his own early in the season. Vanderbilt held his own, trying to pull out of my mind here the other games that he had. But he was a great player, good overall mid-major, low-major player. It hasn't always translated here to what I'd say a down year for the conference of the Big 12. But he does have that upside, and you saw it there in that last game. So not a complete write-off by any means. All right, next game on the slate here, we have Mississippi State versus Oklahoma. Total of 149.5. Mississippi State is a 3.5-point favorite, which is very interesting. See the implied there, right around 76.5 for Mississippi State, 73 for Oklahoma. This should be a very fantasy-friendly game and one that I feel pretty damn good about. Mississippi State has been a team that every single week I'm kind of talking them up. Chris Jans, hey, this team's, they've got the juice. They can play really well. They had a pretty rough stretch there, right? They lost to Kentucky and Auburn. Then they had to go to overtime against Mississippi at home. They did win that game. Then they dropped to a tough Tennessee, took overtime at South Carolina. Then they lost to Bama. Then they lost to Missouri. Then they lost to Florida. Well, they've rattled off 2 in a row. They swept Ole Miss the season series, so that's good. And then they beat up on Texas A&M at home. And that was a very deliberate, very convincing home win over them. Everything clicking for Mississippi State. And they didn't even have that great of production from some of the usual candidates. And that's really how scary this Mississippi State team is and can be. And why I've been hyping them up as a team that could potentially make the second weekend. And I still truly do believe that. If they were in the Big 12, the Big 10, anything like that, this would be a team capable of winning the conference in one of those other conferences, truly. So I think it's important not to write them off. They are deep. They have the juice. Chris Jans is a much better coach than I think people really give him credit for. And I think that they're live too. We'll see some odds here as we get closer to win the SEC tournament. Hot take, I don't know, but I've been on this Mississippi State team since day one. I think I have to continue here. Was all over RJ Melendez last slate. Actually, the last 2 slates, we've been pretty heavy on RJ Melendez. And you can see there in the projections, he's once again one of the highest projected players. Still under 5K. Played 27 minutes against Texas A&M. He was outstanding in the first half. I believe he rattled off like 12 to 14 fantasy points in the first half. I was like, holy shit. He was only 5% owned. Nobody else on him. It's like, this is a great situation for me and our community. And then the second half, he just kind of disappeared. He did take 11 shots, but he was bricking everything. 1 of 7 from downtown. Did get some foul issues there late in the second half. And then once the game got out of hand, he just didn't do a whole lot. But the game before that, we were on him against Ole Miss. Same situation at 4K, but he did play about 25, 26 minutes, but he hit 7 of those 11 shots. Did get in the same foul trouble, but because he hit those shots, 17 and 5 instead of 10 and 5, put up 25.75 DK points. Love RJ Melendez. He has put together some huge games at times this year. He's kind of been inconsistent for sure, but this is the time of year where I feel pretty good about where we stand with these teams. We've seen him enough, and RJ Melendez minutes have solidified. He's kind of risen to the top there, that second tier of player on the team, and he's getting enough shot attempts that sub 5K, you really have to trust him over the likes of Claudell Harris, who has been successful for us earlier in the year, Riley Kugel, who has been pretty good at times here. And that was where the chalk lied. Riley Kugel had a ton of ownership on that slate. We've been tried and true, just kind of continually rolling RJ Melendez out. Nice thing is he's got the forward position eligibility instead of guard. I will say this year, and unlike any other season, forwards have been more appealing than guards. I don't know if you guys feel the same. I know my community has felt the same. But we've had a lot of slates where we've been playing 4 or 5 forwards because they're just so good. So in the past, RJ Melendez forward eligibility instead of guard would be more important. It's not as much now, but I do like RJ Melendez, and he is a core play for me on both sites, FanDuel and DraftKings, where he is under 5K on both sites. There will not be many lineups I make without RJ Melendez. And you can see at 26 minutes, projects absolutely bonkers, over 20 fantasy points. I do believe in him. The volume will be there. If nothing else, the volume will be there, and that's really all I can, worry about at the end of the day. Does have a shot rate that is ballooned towards 20%. He's only making about 27% of his threes, but that volume continues to be there. So I don't really care as long as it's there. And he also has a 3% steal rate, 3% block rate. So he contributes there. He contributes on the glass. He's just doing a lot of good things. Riley Kugel, of course, has better offensive rates in terms of usage shot rate, and that's why people tend to go there. Hell, I've used Riley Kugel plenty this year, but RJ Melendez is just where I trust more at this moment. As far as the other cheapies on the team, Kugel is only 4.4, so I would understand going back to him. In fact, it would be kind of a sharp play, it would be if the masses kind of join us on Melendez and kind of zag there and go Kugel, especially if he stays in the starting lineup. Now, the game blew out, got out of hand. He only played 17 minutes, and he took just 2 shot attempts. That's no good. Riley has been much better in closer games. I would expect this to be a closer game. So expect Kugel to get closer to that, 21, 22-minute mark at least, with the upside for more. If he gets into the mid-20s range, then you're going to see him even better. You see at 21 minutes where I have him right now, he's just under 4x. 4.4 is a very cheap price for Riley Kugel. And they are still having to feed Claudell Harris, who's only 4.3. That's a very cheap price for him as well. And they are giving more minutes to Sean Jones, gearing him up for the tournament. You see he's played 22 or more minutes in 3 of his last 5, and he's been fairly productive as well. But that has caused Kugel and Claudell Harris to basically get cannibalized amongst those 3. They're taking minutes, usage opportunities from each other, and it's made them all cheap, but none of them really projecting super great. If one were to get injured, if one were to get into foul trouble, sick, whatever, and one knocks out, then the other 2 are going to project a lot better because they'll absorb those minutes. But as it is right now, those 3 are sharing court time in minutes, and that's just not great. As for Michael Nwoko, he's also cheap as a starter at 4.1. He's just never going to get more than 18 to 20 minutes, unfortunately. Sean Murphy is continually coming off the bench, but he plays the majority of the second half. Michael doesn't. Michael still projects pretty well, though. As you can see, he's actually 3rd on the projection list here, over 4x. He's got very solid rates. If there were ever a time for him to play 30-plus minutes, he would absolutely detonate on a slate. His time will come. Cam Matthews, I believe, is out of eligibility after this year, and I have a pretty good idea that Sean Murphy may have some NIL transfer portal offers after this. We'll see. It's not as if Mississippi State doesn't have money, but I could see Michael Nwoko being a starting 5 next year, playing 30-plus minutes and absolutely just destroying the slate. 33% combined rebounding rate, 6.5% block rate. He is just fantastic in a multitude of ways. Foul issues have been the trouble there, but just Keshawn Murphy playing behind him just doesn't really help because Murphy is an absolute monster. So you have some cheapies to work with here. Then you get up to Josh Hubbard, who's pretty spendy for my money at 9K. Sean Murphy, who I always love, regardless of price, at 7.7. And then Cam Matthews, who's a reasonably priced 7.1K. The nice thing about Cam Matthews, he doesn't have to do a lot on offense to pay off at this price. He is all over the glass. He racks up stocks. He gets assists. He does everything. There are the occasional games where he scores 15-plus real, and when he does, that's when he breaks the absolute slate. But you just can't trust him for that. But you see, I only have him projected for about 8 real points here at 31 minutes, and he's still nearly 30 fantasy points. Really impressive numbers for him. He does get into foul troubles. He does get a little bit handsy. He is very aggressive, super aggro, which I like that about him, but it does cause him to get himself into foul trouble at times. As far as Keshawn Murphy, he's an elite tournament play, pretty much one of the best top 3 easily GBP play on this slate. He can fill it up in a hurry, and you can see coming off the bench playing 27 minutes, he still projects pretty well right at 4x. If there is a early foul trouble for Mike, or a situation in which he plays 30-plus in a close game like he did against Florida just a couple of weeks ago, he puts up 40s. That's just, fantasy point per minute number for this guy is outrageous. He has fantastic rates. He's only played 18 and 20 minutes over the last 2 games, that being a close win over Ole Miss and a blowout win over Texas A&M. Both of those games, he eclipsed 25 fantasy points without playing over 20 minutes. Just puts it into perspective how great he has been. 32 minutes against Florida, 36. 24 minutes against Missouri, 31. So he is an absolute great tournament play here. Oklahoma, say what you will about Porter Moser. He's a good coach. He really is. Defensively, he's to be feared, but this Oklahoma team, man, there's some talks about Porter. This is a spot where I could see Oklahoma possibly winning, but that's not to say that Mississippi State's not going to get theirs. DFS-wise, there's going to be plenty of fantasy goodness on the Mississippi State side here. And I do feel like outside of Melendez, a lot of people are going to overlook it. Murphy, low-owned. Cam Matthews, low-owned. Hubbard, who I'm not really going to be on too much, he will be low-owned. And we know he's fully capable of absolutely detonating a slate also with his crazy high shot rate. So a lot to like on the Mississippi State side here. On the Oklahoma side, there's going to be plenty to look at here. The top two being Jalen Moore and Jeremiah Fears. Fears missed some time there. Now he's played 30-plus minutes in 3 straight since returning. He had a rough outing on the road against Missouri. Passed there. It was an early game back for him. He wasn't as good against LSU. Did score 15 real, but only put up 21 with that because of all the turnovers. And then he had that breakout game. It's a blowout loss to Florida, but 22, 5, and 2. We've seen him put up some really big games earlier in the non-con schedule in the early SEC. Not as much lately, but this is a good spot for him against Mississippi State. Nowhere near trusting him in a main lineup at 7.6. That price has elevated a lot compared to where he just was in the 6K range. But at the end of the day, I could see him on a GPP winning optimal. Would trust Jalen Moore, even though Mississippi State has that aggressive front court defense. Moore is just a very gifted low block scorer. He can score in a multitude of ways. He can hit threes as well, but he is a pretty high level, sophisticated offensive weapon for this team. The physicality isn't always there with him. Rebounding can be sparse, and I think he does have those troubles in this game here with the likes of Murphy, Noelko, Matthews looming. But I do think he scores a pretty solid real point number, which I'm going to be looking at his point prop. It is 15.5 in a lot of places. I don't love that. I was hoping for like 12.5, 13.5. But I do think this is a game where he could score 20 real, honestly. And that would be enough for him to make value at this 7.2 price. And you see right around 33 minutes, we do have him right at 30 fantasy points, scoring just about 19 real, 6.5 rebounds. A pretty solid outing, no doubt. So those are the easy plays. Then there are the secondary looks here. And you can see, Bryson Goodine at 4.1, who's mostly a shooter. He projects pretty well at 24 minutes. Duke Miles at only 5.2, playing 27-ish minutes. He projects well. And then Sam Godwin, who always projects well. Always have to turn him down. He had some really big games early in the season. He's only 3.6. He can never really get past the 15-minute mark because of fouls, but he projects okay as well here. But I would expect him to get into foul trouble. And then we did see a spike in minutes for Kobe Elvis last time out, so his projection is not horrible either. But those secondary pieces for Oklahoma have been a merry-go-round of production. Sometimes Goodine steps up. Sometimes Elvis steps up. And then we see Duke Miles come up with some big games. So very, very hard to peg on a game-to-game basis, but they are cheap enough to speculate on. You look at the game here in their last one against Florida. Goodine played 30. Had 8.6 rebounds, 1 block, 1 steal. That was actually a fairly decent game for him peripheral-wise that we don't typically see. Miles got into early foul trouble throughout, so he only played 15 minutes. That's where we saw the additional time for Kobe Elvis, who did play 20. He had an okay game, 6 points, 2 assists. And then the freshman Dayton Forsythe, who had his minutes kind of increasing there for a while. He's hit a mini freshman wall. He only played 13. But any one of those guys could play 20-plus and pan out here. And you have to mention Glenn Taylor as well, who has had some fairly decent games randomly. If I had to choose one, I would say Bryson Goodine's the most interesting simply because he's 4.1 and he's going to get shots up. But the most complete player after Fears and Moore is clearly Duke Miles. Handles the rock a little bit, does get it done in the glass. Typically, we're going to see 30-plus minutes out of him. He did put up 30 and 36 against LSU and Missouri. So when Fears was struggling, Miles was the one stepping up there. Only 3 shot attempts against LSU, but he put up 30. Gets himself to the foul line a lot. Only 9 shot attempts against Missouri, but he put up 37. Got himself to the foul line 7 times. And he's also had 9 steals in the past 2 games prior to the Florida game. That obviously props up his fantasy number Going up against Mississippi State, they do turn it over. They have several guys who have those troubles. So this is an interesting game for Duke Miles at 5-2. So if I'm a little bit light on his minutes at 27, perhaps this is a game he plays about 32, 33. You see, he instantly becomes a top value as opposed to a middling value. So really kind of dependent there on what those minutes might look like. I do like him quite a bit, but I'm being a little bit conservative there. Last man in territory. I think he will be very close to my main lineup at this moment. All right, let's move on to next game, West Virginia, Texas Tech. Total of 135.5. Tech is a 11.5 point favorite. Man, the daytime shows, we go fast. I guess the nighttime, I'm just, I'm not as quick. We're at an hour here, so we'll get going here quickly. We had a hell of a game last Texas Tech slate from Darian Williams, who was one of our top 4 plays on the slate. He came in at 9% owned. I love when that happens. Love it when a plan comes together. I think we'll have a little bit more company on Darian this time. He's still priced extremely cheap at 7.9, and after that huge game he just had, like I said, I would expect others to come around to using him as well. Not a great matchup, West Virginia. We know defensively they get it done. We just talked about them in a matchup they shut another team down in. But Darian, just like vintage performance there against TCU, 37 minutes, 5 assists, 2 steals, 21 real points on his way to 34. Definitely on board with him at 7.9. Anytime he's under 8K, you just have to give him consideration. He's been banged up. He's been sick, but it seems as though he's shaken that off. He has scored 30-plus in 2 of his last 3. Granted, there was the multi-overtime game against ASU a couple of weeks back, or 1 week back, I should say. But he has been fantastic. So right back on the Darian Williams train. Another pay up here in JT Toppin at 10.4. God, man, it was only like Valentine's Day where we're getting him at a steep discount. This is what happens when you throw up a 70 and 60 in back-to-back games. The downside was, hey, he put up a 32. That's typically 35, 40. You know what we're going to see from JT Toppin at this exorbitant price. It's just okay. You set the bar so high at 70 that a 30 becomes a down game for you. That becomes pretty tough. So we will be able to get to JT Toppin if we want. If the value available to us, you can get multi-pay-ups. So it is there. I just think that we can pay down for Darian Williams. And instead of having to force out 3 players under 5K, under 4K, we only need to do 2. We play Darian Williams, another guy in the 7-8K range. I know some of the 7-8K range guys feel a little overpriced themselves, but I'm just a little more comfortable with that as opposed to jamming in these values because there's some real dark side potential from these cheap values that are available to us. I'm talking like single-digit dark potential. So Toppin is there if you want to get to him. I'm never going to talk anyone out of JT Toppin. West Virginia is a tough matchup for anyone, so keep that in mind. Elijah Hawkins is a little spendy at 7.9 for me. I do prefer Chance McMillan at 6.9, but I think both of those guys are clearly down the list. And even so, Christian Anderson, Federico, Overton, Kerwin Walton, all those secondary looks who are cheap. It's really just about Darian Williams here for me. I don't want to get involved in too many West Virginia games, as we just saw against Cincinnati, 62-59. A little bit of a concern here for me in this one, and Texas Tech has been involved in some very high-scoring game. The implied for them, 73.5, West Virginia 62. Like this one very easily could be a 65-62 type of game. Just don't want to get too involved in that. And on the West Virginia side, really not a lot of interest there for me, as typically on West Virginia slates. I did mention Amani Hansberry before last slate being kind of the main look there, still priced at a low 6K range. He ended up going way, way harder than I thought he would against Cincinnati. We pegged his minutes right around 27, but he had 17 and 13. Absolute monstrous game. That's pushed his price up to 7K. Can't use him there personally, but he is definitely morphed into the top front court option for this West Virginia team, and a ton of untapped potential still to go. Javon Small is on the cheap side for him at 9.3. He's got major upside. We laid off against Cincinnati, and we Haven't really been preaching him as a main team play in quite some time, honestly. I think that there's enough scouting reports out there for teams that they're just focusing on him so much that he's not putting up those huge numbers like he once was. He's still scoring at a high level, but those peripherals have been a little bit more spotty. And that just has to do with the fact that his teammates are not keeping up with him. We have seen Joe Yusufu play a lot more minutes lately because of the starters like John Paul or Powell, who is the freshman learning on the job, like Sincere Harris, Toby Okani. Like those guys have played and logged a ton of minutes because of injuries, and they're just kind of gassing out. So Yusufu has played 23 plus minutes in 5 straight off the bench, and he's been a relatively solid option at 4-4. He is playable there. Would love a point prop on him from one of the books because I think there's some upside there. As a DFS play, he's a low-level value, but he is seeing his minutes increase pretty much each game over the last 5. Powell at 5-4, he's looked pretty good lately. 3 of his last 4, he scored over 20. He's just taking a ton of shots, like a ridiculous amount of shots. Next year, with a year under his belt, he's going to be so good. It's important to remember he's only a freshman and just getting to play out this entire season because of Tucker DeVry's injury. All right, let's move on to the next game here. Penn State versus Minnesota. This is a total of 141.5. Minnesota, a 3.5-point favorite. And this is where some fantasy goodness comes into play for us. And I'm curious to see how this shakes out. I do think Dawson Garcia ends up being the highest owned pay up by a large margin. And I think that's the right move. I want to get too cute by fading him. We have the rule. It's a unofficial rule, but in the Discord community on FTN, when we have guys who are priced 10K above and they're still projecting well over 4X, you kind of just have to plug them in. With Yaxel Lindenberg of UAB, he's one, even at 11K, he's projecting, almost 5X at times. Like, you just got to plug those guys in. And Dawson Garcia, he's played every single minute available in each of the last 2 games, playing a very suspect Penn State team, which on paper should be much better defensively under Mike Rhodes. Got Ace Baldwin, they've got Nick Kieran, they've got some dudes who can defend. But as the team, their defense has been awful this year, and it's a true shocker for me. So Dawson Garcia should be able to absolutely nuke this Penn State team, and I expect his ownership to, in turn, be very, very high. Clearly the top pay up. No argument there. You see at 39, 40 minutes, 44 fantasy points, 4.4X. Just a no-brainer. Now, there are things that could happen, right? He gets into foul trouble. It's happened before. But that playing time just can't be ignored. He could be 11K on this slate, and I still think we'd probably end up playing him. That's the easy decision. Now, the rest of it's pretty difficult because you have a Minnesota team that's really not fun. They're usually on short slates, which has really not been kind to us. But we have this large slate here, and we have a myriad of options to look to at a variety of price points as well. It starts with Mike Mitchell, who's priced down there at 4.8. Played 36 minutes against UCLA. That UCLA game was a shock. The second half that UCLA imploded there at home was I just did not see that coming. And Mike Mitchell was a big part of that. 14 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 5 of 12 from the field, hit 4 threes in that game on his way to 25 fantasy points. It was his best game in a month easily. The prior 4 to 5 games, a complete non-factor. So I do want to caution, because it's going to look like, oh my God, Mike Mitchell at 4.8. He projects absolutely bonkers. He does, as you can see. He's going to have one of the higher projections there at 4.7K. It's just ridiculous. He can lay an egg. He has done it many times in marquee matchups before. So I want to make that clear. The price is just so cheap that it's going to be hard not to utilize him, because this is not a high total necessarily, but it's one of the better environments that I think a game stack can work. And having multiple Minnesota plays before has absolutely slapped us in the mouth, and it probably will again, but it's going to be very, very hard to get away from. Mike Mitchell is likely going to be relatively chalky, so there is some major upside to fading him in the 5K to first. But it's also very, very scary because it could be a big game for him. He has a 22.6% shot rate, also shooting about 35% from long range. All the minutes he can possibly handle. Yes, he typically doesn't get into foul trouble, but it's clearly happened before. And you look at the kind of sporadic nature of the minutes played. They got blown out against Illinois, so he played 22, played 36 in that come from behind win over UCLA. I think he settles somewhere in the range of 30, 31 minutes, and that puts him well over value at this price point. Femi Odakale, not a big scorer, puts up a ton of peripherals, is very well known for his defense on this team. Then you have Lukai Patterson, who's higher at 6'8". He's been a pretty good de facto scorer, alpha next to Dawson Garcia at times. And when Garcia is not hitting, Patterson has stepped up. He's interesting at 6'8", and you can see all these Minnesota guys projecting well over value. Patterson, Garcia, Odakale, and Mitchell. I am leaning Garcia and Mike Mitchell for now. I think a lot of the field will be feeling the same. So Odakale and Patterson are going to represent some high leverage GPP looks, especially in lineups that you do fade a probably 40% owned Dawson Garcia, which is ridiculously stupid on a 10-game slate that's priced so tight, but Dawson Garcia is just head and shoulders above the rest in terms of where to spend your money. I do think there's some merit to using Frank Mitchell. He has been pushing Parker Fox for minutes here for the last couple of weeks, honestly. Played 20 in back-to-back games in that West Coast road trip, 20 against USC, put up almost 40 against them, 15 and 12. It was a huge game. He was the reason why they won, honestly. And then the come from behind win over UCLA, played 23 minutes, 4 points, 4 rebounds. He put up only 10 fantasy points that time, but important to note, he's played 20-plus minutes in back-to-back games. This is a spot where he can do well, and I think he continues to play over Parker Fox. Now, Parker Fox can also go off at any time. He's only 3.7. He had some pretty big games in the non-con. In conference play, he struggled a lot more. I think anybody who has followed college basketball with any regularity over the past few years probably saw that coming. He is maintaining a starter level role, but I think Mitchell has at this point usurped him and should continue playing more minutes. And then you have the youngster Isaac Asuma, who was in major foul trouble against UCLA, played just 7 minutes. He had played 25-plus minutes in 3 straight, which includes 35 against Penn State last time they played them, and he did have 5 points, 4 rebounds, 3 steals, which was good for 21 fantasy points. Now he's only priced at 4-1 after a pretty terrible foul game. He is certainly interesting. Last time these two teams played, it was a 69-61 victory for Minnesota on Penn State's floor. Now Penn State has to go to the Barn, where it's a very difficult place to play unless you're the Washington Huskies. And I think this is going to be a spot that Penn State definitely struggles. Minnesota puts up a pretty big number. Brennan Rigsby also put up 14 real against Penn State that day. I'm not saying we should play Brennan Rigsby. He didn't even play the last game, and he only played 1 minute against USC because I believe he had the flu. So we could see him milling about and possibly cutting into some minutes for a guy like Isaac Asuma or Femi Odakale, but I highly doubt it. Just something to be aware of, that he dealt a killing blow to Penn State last time they played, mostly because foul trouble to Mike Mitchell and Femi in that one. On the Penn State side, I definitely want to caution against Yannick Conan-Niederhauser, who does project really well. That is because he is destined to get into foul trouble on the road in a hostile environment like the Barn. Now, at 27 minutes and 6.7K, he is certainly a top 10 play. In a perfect world where we don't have to worry about fouls, I want to live in that universe. And you know, he gets those minutes, he's going to be a top 10 play. He's going to put up 30 plus, guaranteed. Now, what I can't guarantee is that he'll actually hit that threshold, which he needs is at 26 to 27 minutes. I am very concerned that he plays less than 20 because he just continually fouls on the road. When they played Minnesota last time, he was out for that game, and that's part of the reason why Minnie had such a tremendous amount of success in the front court there. His first game back after missing a couple, he held out in 12 minutes. That was against USC. Now, he had a big game against my Huskies. Everyone does. 10 and 11. Then he had a 19 and 4 performance against Nebraska, who Nebraska's interior defense had been pretty solid until recently. So back-to-back games over 27 fantasy points. 3 of his last 4, he's been over 27 as well. He's just really, really solid at 27 or more minutes. Uncannily, I'll just make that word up, uncannily solid at 27 plus minutes. So if you believe he stays out of foul trouble, I think you almost have to play him, because the matchup's really, really good for him stylistically, but I just don't trust him personally to not get foul trouble here on the road. That is the big major concern for me here with Yannick Conan Niederhauser. And again, he missed the last Minnesota game, so they had to go to Kachi Enze, and he did absolutely horrible. In fact, I think he had like 4 fouls in 4 minutes. So it's not a great look here for him. Foul rate is 4.1 per 40. We've seen worse. We've seen better, but we've seen worse. So that's my spiel on Yannick, because I think he is a really solid leverage piece as well. Like, I'm probably just going to throw some GPP builds out there with Yannick as a centerpiece, because I don't think anyone else will. And he could potentially put up a 40 here in this spot if he doesn't get into foul trouble. That's a realistic outcome for Yannick. This Minnesota team, they've got some physicality, but they don't have the interior presence to really contain a guy like that. Maybe I'm just too high on Yannick. He can hit shots. He's got good footwork. I really like him as a play. So I just know he's going to get that too early foul. So I won't be able to pull the trigger in Maine, but definitely going to have exposure. Expect Puff Johnson to still be out. I don't even think he's coming back this year. So we have seen DeMarco Dunn starting. Freddie Dion did work his way back after starting majority of the season. Last Penn State game out there against Nebraska, and they scored almost 90. We did see Dion back in the starting lineup. He didn't start over Dunn, who stayed in the starting lineup. It was Nick Kieran who he started over. Now, Kieran still played 28 minutes off the bench, and basically they went with a 6-man rotation for that one, and then Kachi Enze played about 10 to kind of give Niederhauser some water breaks. Otherwise, Hicks, Baldwin, Dion all played over 30. Kern basically played 30. And then you had DeMarco Dunn at 25. So Dion is an interesting look. He's only 4.7K. He has been mostly tied to his scoring ability, which he can get hot in a hurry. The consistency is not there by any means. He doesn't really have the peripherals to hold him up as a play if the shot's not falling. And he had a horrible outing against Minnesota. He played 24 minutes against them and somehow managed to score under 10 fantasy points. So he is definitely a look at 4.7, but far down the value list. But when you look at the projections, he obviously, in a perfect world, is over 4x there at his expected minutes threshold. We got some nice games out of Ace Baldwin at 7.6 and 7K, but now he's back up over 9K after 3 straight games over 30. Not really interested in him against Minnesota either. I think he's going to have a lot of turnovers, unfortunately, probably some foul issues there. For the most part, I'm not that high on the Penn State wings or guards. It's just the decision of, am I going to go with Yannick and nut up and not worry about fouls, or am I going to throw Freddie Dion in as some salary relief for a more stars and scrubs build approach? But on the Minnesota side, I definitely am going to have at least 2 pieces of their team in my main lineup, and I don't feel very good about that whatsoever. I want to be very clear about that, and I don't think anyone else should either. All right, moving on to the next game, we have Wake Forest versus NC State. It's a total of 137.5. Wake Forest is a 3.5 point favorite. Hey, yeah, Friday nights are still gonna be late, my man. There we go. Yeah, we're still gonna do the Friday night show because Saturday mornings I do the CFB like live before lock show, and it works. But for basketball, it's a little tougher. It is an early time too, but yeah, we'll still do the first look on Fridays. But we will be daytime on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and that's for the foreseeable future. And as we expand out those shows to Mondays, Sundays, and Thursdays, there'll be mostly daytime shows there. There will be a couple nighttime. And during the tournament, obviously, we'll be doing night shows to cover those first and second rounds. But yeah, glad to see you, man. I know I can count on you to show up anytime. But those daytime shows are fun. A lot of interactions and goodness there. So I appreciate you guys continuing to show up and show out. All right, Wake Forest versus NC State. Let's pull them up. You would think this was a game that we would want to have a ton of, especially with the way NC State's been just getting blistered, but not necessarily all that intriguing of a game, surprisingly. Implied here of 70.5 for Wake Forest, 67 for NC State, just kind of ordinary for the most part. Ben Middlebrooks laid an absolute egg against North Carolina in a great, obviously, DVP spot. The minutes weren't there. He is priced very cheap at 4-4, but he doesn't project all that highly at that price. Is a home game, but you have Brendan Hutley Halffield back as well, who's only 3.8, and I think those two are just kind of splitting those minutes at the 5 at this point. I do think one of them ends up making value because they don't need to do a whole hell of a lot to make value at those prices, but I'm just no longer confident in them, and I've never really been that confident in Middlebrooks. I did use him the first time against North Carolina, and he came through for us, but I wasn't on him last time. I actually got away from that DVP spot because I just didn't feel very comfortable with it. Dontrez Styles and Jaden Taylor are semi-main team viable plays because of the high minutes and the solid floor, but they're very uninspiring plays at this point. And I while I think they're safe-ish, I do think we need, we don't want to just throw a bunch of kind of 3x plays into our lineup and say, well, it's a low-scoring slate, Walt said, so that'll be fine. We still need some guys that are going to give us, some higher scores here. We don't want to have a bunch of Dontrez Styles in our lineup. Not to say that doesn't work with a few, but we definitely need to mix it up here a little bit. So Styles to me is the best fantasy asset on the team, but this is a hangover. You can't even be mad at NC State. You can't be mad at Keats. After what happened last year, like you could ride this season into the hemisphere of like we're hungover, we don't have that great of a roster, we absolutely are gassed out, exhausted, emotionally spent as a fan base, a program, a coaching staff, and just kind of gear up for next year. So they're going through the motions this year. I hate to say it. I think at this point, Keats should just unleash Trey Parker and Dennis Parker and let them play all the minutes they can handle. Shit, throw Paul McNeil out there, like kind of just say, hey, Marcus Hill, thanks for coming. Dontrez Styles, thanks for coming. But we're going to play our kids. We're going to play our kids at this point so that we can gear up for next year, see what we can do in the portal, and come back and try to do this thing again. But I don't know if Keats will actually do that. He's pretty loyal to his guys, which is respectable. But at this point, Trey and Dennis and Paul McNeil should all be playing like 25 minutes plus. Just let them play. Let them go John Powell of West Virginia. On the Wake Forest side, not as great of projections as I would have thought either. I do think Trevon Spillers is a nice GBP look at 6'8". I'm actually tempted to pull the trigger on him in Maine as well. He gets overlooked consistently, and yes, he's had some clunker of some games, but the Wake Forest bench is non-existent. Cam Hildreth is once again questionable, maybe borderline doubtful, and we should see 35 to 36 minutes out of Spillers at a very fair price of 6'8", in which I think he can just give us a 30-32, go over value, and kind of just be that safety valve for us in our lineup. So I'm very high on Trevon Spillers. Not so much on Tyler Johnson, a.k.a. Tights, at 5'8". We did ride the wave on him for a while, but Jesus, he quickly reminded us why we can't just auto-play Tyler Johnson. At least it reminded me. He does project okay. Juke Harris is the main benefactor if Hildreth can't go. You see in the projections I have Hildreth expected to play. Basically, the reports I've read is that he's practiced enough and and likely going to go. So that does rank Juke Harris back down. If Hildreth can't go, Harris is an interesting value at 3.6. He's had some pretty nice production here throughout the course of the season. He's another one that I think is going to be a very valuable asset next year for us and Wake Forest if he stays. We did see Parker Fredrickson at 3.4 without Hildreth. He got a bunch of minutes. I have him down there projected for 8 minutes with Hildreth back. Played 30 without him, so just play it like that. If Hildreth doesn't play, then you can look to him at 3.4. Now, I know he put up a ridiculous 18-4, 28.5 fantasy points, and you might be looking at that and be like, damn, we got to play him. He is just an absolute monster. Well, he did score 5 threes, 5 of 7. Ordinarily never shoots that well, and he's had a ton of games where he's played 14, 18, 20 minutes and done very little. His fantasy point per minute number is actually very, very low. He hasn't had any games this calendar year where he's played that level of minutes, but he did have in November some games like against Florida where he played 25 and 27 and 23 against Michigan and put together an okay game, 12 to 15 fantasy points, which definitely pays off 3-4. It's certainly viable, but I just want to temper expectations because I do know that people get a tendency to get a little excited seeing something like that and think, oh my God, this guy's an absolute auto play, and then have him, deliver you a single-digit 5 salad the very next game and wonder what happened. So just please temper expectations with a player like Parker Fredrickson. If Hildreth doesn't go, I get it. I think I would just go up to Juke Harris at 3.6, especially if the masses are all chasing that Parker game. I think Juke Harris is a much better overall player and somebody that we could rely on a bit more. Now, he didn't have that spike game, so I get it, but he has been productive, and he has shown that in spurts throughout. 14 minutes here, he's gotten, 19. 17 minutes, he scored 14 fantasy points. He put up 17.5 last game. So Juke Harris has been solid. He would be the one I'd want to go. I don't think I'll end up on either, but that's just my take on it. Was surprised to see Efton Reed actually be able to stay on the court for 38 minutes against SMU. That was a really, really nice game for him. Reed has just not lived up to the hype and the pressure that the DFS community has put on him, but he's been great at times. 6.5 is an interesting price. I am more on Spillers than him, but for the same reason I like Spillers, you can apply that to Reed as well. I think they have a athletic advantage over the NC State front court, and they should be able to both score with ease. Now, Reed has to keep himself out of foul trouble, and I trust Spillers to do that more than Reed, but both at 32-plus minutes are solid looks, and they're priced about the same. That leaves Hunter Salas. And I'm not playing Cam Hildreth at 8.5 coming off the one-game absence, so just throw that out there right away. Hunter Salas at 9.5. He had a monster game against SMU, and he scored over 40 in 2 of his last 4, and he's been over 30 in 4 straight. So he is a pay-up that is viable. He has a high usage rate, takes a ton of shots, fills up the box score. He's a great overall play. Definitely nothing against Hunter Salas. He should be higher on my list than he is, and he's got great splits, road and home splits. He's much better on the road, or he has shown that in road games. And I know that's an Adam Young special for you, one of our community members and producer extraordinaire, up for multiple MLB awards, by the way, from the FSWA conference. Well done. So Salas is a nice look at 9.5, but you look at where we have him projected at 38 minutes, it's just okay. I think more often than not, he's sliding in there with 35, 36, which is probably enough for this slate, honestly, the way that it's shaping up. But I'm just kind of built and wired to where can I eke out just a little bit more savings, just a little bit more. And on this team, I like Trayvon Spillers. All right, let's move on to the game I've been alluding to all freaking night. Iowa State versus Houston. Total of 131.5. Houston at 12.5 point favorite. When the game pops on the slate, you can look at it. Iowa State is a team, they play a physical level of defense, not usually in a team that we want to target against very often. Houston, same thing, physicality, not a team we want to target against very often. Playing against each other, easy write-off. I'm not touching any of those teams. No way. Easy fade. Let's just move on to the next one. wait a minute. We get the news earlier today that Iowa State has not one, but two key players out and possibly a third. This isn't great. This is not great because this means not only do we have to consider players in a game with a low total and just a grinded out environment, but we are going to have chalky plays in this one that we have to play, and that's just a recipe for disaster. And I hate feeling obligated to play someone because of ownership. And it's not even that. It's just that the minutes are going to be there in a huge way for these cheap players. So let's get into the injury side here and what we're looking at for Iowa State. Basically, Curtis Jones out. He's been starting without Milan Momklivovich. Now that Momklivovich is back, he's been coming off the bench as the sixth man. He has I don't know if it's a norovirus, but the severe flu. So he's out. Keyshawn Gilbert is going to be out, starting guard. Muscle strain is what it's being called for him. So he is out as well. So two key pieces here. And then Tamin Lipsey is also dealing with some sort of shoulder issue. As of now, he's expected to play, but kind of starting to push towards highly questionable, maybe shades of doubtful. And now I'm starting to think that Iowa State is just throwing this game. I feel like Curtis Jones could probably have played. What's a muscle strain really? And nowadays, this has a feeling of oh God, we're playing NBA DFS now. It's a rest day here. It's the Joel Embiid special. I have a stubbed toenail or something. So this is a rough environment for Iowa State. They're still going to get a nice seed. Houston's going to get a nice seed, but it's almost like a game where Iowa State can kind of just coast, right? They don't have to get their other healthy players beat to hell, and they can probably just get out of there. It's going to be an embarrassing loss. I feel pretty confident in that, but it'll be one where everybody's just going to give them a pass. Oh, you didn't have Curtis Jones, your top scorer. You didn't have Keyshawn Gilbert, your top facilitator. Well, you go into a hostile environment like Houston, you're not going to win without those two. Oh, and Tamin Lipsey was banged up. He tried to start. He plays 15 minutes. Well, I guess you get a free pass. That's kind of how it's setting up. I think Lipsey does start and play. You look at the minutes there, I do have him, I amped his minutes up with the expectation he's going to have to play a lot at 35, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like he plays less than that and gets progressively worse as the game goes on, and they just end up pulling him. So what this means is we're obligated to play some of these cheap Iowa State players. I don't think there's any way around that. You're going to have to roster at least one, and you might have to roster two. There's not a lot of upside with it, but when you have Nate Heise, who's the expected starter to come in for Keyshawn Gilbert at 3-6, playing a minimum of what I foresee being 30 minutes, that's hard to get away from. Demarion Watson, who was playing some minutes there for a while with Milan Momklivovich out, he's probably going to be the first off the bench. And you look at him at 3-1 playing, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. That's really appealing, maybe even more if Lipsey has to sit and can't go very much, or the game just gets out of hand and they say, you know what, let's just run these guys into the ground. Milan Momklivovich at 4-5, he's going to have to play a ton of minutes. He's very cheap. So you've got a ton of exceptional value here from hey, they're just going to be on the floor for a long time. Are they actually going to pan out and give you a high enough score to matter? Maybe not, but you just have no choice in the matter. You just can't fade guys under 4K and under 5K that are going to play these level of minutes. So the way I envision it, I see Nate Heise starting. Now there is a potential for Noja's Indrositis, I know that's a tough one to say, to start instead. Probably going to be Heise, and then we see Nojas be the first one to sub for him. So I do think Nojas could play anywhere from 12 all the way up to 20 minutes. I have him slotted in around 16, but there could be more. So keep that in mind for Indrositis, who is min price. Heisey starting and playing 30-plus minutes seems an inevitability, so he would be the number one value for this team and probably the first one we're going to start our lineups with. Demarion Watson, I think, is a very strong pair at 3-1. You got 3-6 and 3-1, two guys playing 20-plus minutes most likely and taking all that minutes and usage, and especially in the second half when the game's out of hand. That's a nice look. I think a lot of people will go Heisey as the starter and Milan because he's going to take all those Curtis Jones shots. He hasn't been great since he's returned, but that volume should be there for him. I'm a little bit less likely to use him just because I think, yeah, he's going to be chalky, and if he shoots 2 for 20, that's not going to help anyone. I mean, they're still playing Houston. That's the crappy part about all of this. They're playing Houston, a terrifying defense, a team that I don't like to target against for DFS purposes. They are the vintage Virginia level team in DFS from the last couple of years. The championship title Virginia squad that you just couldn't target against until you were forced to. Houston is close to that level for me. But at these prices, these expected minutes, you just can't get away from them. So for me, Heisey and Watson, I think are a really nice look because I expect Demarion Watson to play a lot as well, even if he doesn't start. And I think a lot of people are going to overlook that. And digging into Watson here at near min price, without Milan, he had the 21-minute game against Kansas State. He looked very good. 7 rebounds, 4 points, put up 20 fantasy points that day by scoring 4 real. 14 minutes against Kansas, he put up 14 fantasy points. Like any of that, and then 12 against Arizona. He had a nice stretch there without Milan. 14 minutes, 21 and 14, and he put up double digits in all 3. Anything of 12 or more at 3-1, we're feeling pretty damn good about. Only took 11 minutes against UCF in a blowout win over them. He put up 22 in that time. I could see a similar situation with garbage time, Demarion Watson panning out. So I'm much higher on Demarion Watson than I think anyone else in the industry will be. Whether that is a good idea or not, that'll remain to be seen. You guys know I've never shied away from a take, and I draw a line in the sand, and I stand by those takes. So Demarion Watson is going to be a pretty heavy look for me. And then Brandon Heisey. Don't expect a huge jump for Brandon Chatfield, who obviously I think he'll get garbage time minutes, so there is merit to using him to a degree. He's obviously the backup behind Josh Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson, so no real impact there for him until the game gets out of hand, if it does get out of hand. So you don't have to really consider him all that much. And then as far as Josh Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson, and Tim Lipsey go, the guys who would have to shoulder the load, there is usage opportunities there, and the prices on those guys is pretty solid. I mean, Deshaun Jackson at 4.6, he's still cheap enough to look at. Lipsey at 6.6, if you think he's healthy and can shake off whatever shoulder ailment he has, that's really cheap. And then Jefferson at 8.3, but he's going to have to be tussling with JoJo Tugler. That's got foul issues written all over it for both of those guys. So it's a decision between Heisey, Momklevich, and Watson in my eyes. Andrewsitis is more of the GPP look, the deep 1% play that nobody's going to be on, but very well could actually hit 20 minutes himself. And if he does, he's somewhat interesting of a play as well. And I don't think he'll be afraid to jack up shots if that's the case. Andrewsitis in short spurts, he has a freshman 13 games. His shot rate is 25.5%. His usage rate is 23.7%. Now he's only made 2 of 14 of his threes that he's taken. He's the type of player that comes in the last 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and just chucks when he gets in there. But those rates are impressive nonetheless, and a lot of that was done in the non-con when he played earlier. And I was actually doing this against teams like Colorado, Kansas City, IU, Indy, Mississippi Valley State, which I know everyone beats up on the Delta Devils, but holding his own against teams like Colorado, played 12 minutes against Dayton, had a pretty solid 4-2-1 stat line with a steal. So there's potential there for Andrewsitis as well. Obviously, that would be an unnecessary risk in your main build, but I have seen at least one Iowa State beat say that he would not be shocked if Andrewsitis started instead of Heisey. So we'll see. And that game is towards the end of the slate. In slate swaps and news, we've seen the industry whiff on or not notice as much as the beginning of the slate swaps. And news. So if everyone rosters Heisey with the understanding he's probably going to start and it ends up being Andrewsitis, that could be a fun little bit of leverage that we have over the rest of the field. Probably won't matter as much because Heisey's still going to play a lot too, but it is worth noting that Indrositis as a starter at 5% would be a pretty leg up on the rest of the field. Houston side, theoretically they should bang against Iowa State, but it's not like we like targeting against Iowa State either. Milos Uzan's pretty expensive at $8K. LJ Cryer is way too expensive for me at 7.4. Juwan Roberts is playable at 6.9. JoJo Tugler has upside at 5.9. We know all that with them. Really just comes down to if I want to roster Manny Sharp again. Was really surprised at how low owned Manny Sharp was on the last Houston slate. I know he really let the industry down as Mega Chalk 2 games ago, but at ASU, who we have said we have our list of teams here when they're on the slate we've got to stack against, right? UCF, ASU, Iowa, Kentucky. Those are the 4 teams we've, if you've watched the show at any point this year, those are the teams. Got to stack for and against their games. And Houston playing ASU with Manny Sharp being 4.9 just seemed like an absolute no-brainer. So we got a gift there with him being under 10%. And he put up a huge game, 17-4 with 2 steals, put up 30 fantasy points. He is priced at 5.1, still very cheap. I do think he sees a little bit of ownership because of that last game and the opportunity, but I'm probably pulling back off of Sharp. And I'm not even sure I'll end up with any Houston exposure, as kind of odd as that may seem. Sharp is the top projected play for Houston, but I do think this is a game where if you want to get cute with some of your alt builds, Terry Arsenault, Milik Wilson, Javier Francis, those are the type of looks to consider if this does get out of hand sooner rather than later. And I think that probably will be the case. Yeah, that about sums it up for sure. Like, could they be playing anybody else? Could they be playing ASU this slate instead? But then it wouldn't be as fun. At least this one we know. At least one of those Iowa State chalk values is just going to completely brick. Like probably put up 5, if that. And one of them is going to go for like 20 because they're going to hit shots. And I think it might be Demarion Watson. I'm kind of taking a stand there. Not even in my vocabulary. I am taking a stand there. But I'm probably going to just roster both. Indrositis is the one that becomes really interesting. So we'll see. But that's going to probably determine a lot. All right, last game on the slate here, Pittsburgh versus Notre Dame. This is a total of 141.5. Pitt is a 1.5 point favorite. Pitt, we'll start with them. Everybody priced pretty much where they should be at this stage. Jalan Lowe at 8.7, Ish Leggett at 9.7, Zach Austin at 7.8. And then you have Guillermo Diaz-Graham over 5K because he just put up a huge game for the first time and feels like forever. All of them priced where they should be or even a little bit higher. And it's a great matchup against Notre Dame. So I don't want to completely write them off. But none of those guys are going to be very close to my main lineup, I think. And they don't project all that great. They're okay. You might notice there, why do I have Brandon Cummings projected so high? And that has to do with the fact that his minutes are pretty dialed in right now, even though the team is mostly healthy, aside from the fact that they lost Damian Dunn for the year. And it does seem like Brandon Cummings, who is a very high upside youngster, and I think Coach Capel is understanding that, in the NIL transfer portal era, you got to play these guys or you're just going to lose them. And Cummings showed during times in games where Lowe had to sit out, in games where Leggett had to sit out. We've seen some big performances from Brandon Cummings. He has shown himself to be a very gifted scorer. He can shoot the lights out. He can put up a very big number. That EKU game where he made like 1 million threes, that was eye-opening performance. Obviously, it was against Eastern Kentucky, but still showed what he was capable of. Now, in 3 straight games, especially lately here with Dunn out for the season, 17 minutes, 33, and 30. And he scored 22, 21, and 17 fantasy points in each. The game against Syracuse was close for a while. The game against SMU, in which they got their doors blown off, wasn't. So we got a lot of second half run. And then the game against Miami, they got pushed there. They didn't end up winning, but Cummings was on the floor for 33 minutes in that Miami game. So he's only 4.3. The minutes are there for him, and that is why he projects so well, because he's got pretty strong rates, and I've slotted him in around 26 minutes. And I'm inclined to believe that is a good projection on him because of where his minutes have sat the last 3. Looking at his rates right now, 20.2% shot rate, 18.5% usage rate. In conference play, that number is ballooned up to 20%. He's shooting 38% from long range on 60 attempts, and has drawn about 4 fouls per 40. Steal rate has ballooned up to 2% in conference play. So the Miami game was a start, obviously, because Julian Lowe missed. So that was the 33 minutes there. So you can I'll give you that as, oh, well, that was a start, so wave it off. But he still played 30 against Syracuse, still played 17 against SMU. It's definitely a risky move. I wouldn't use him in your main build or anything that you're doing high dollar with, but you're firing out those lineups in the 5K to first. Brandon Cummings at 2%. If he plays anywhere close to that projected minutes, he's going to end up on the optimal. I feel pretty confident in that, especially against Notre Dame. Not quite brave enough, I think, to run him and then the Watson over Heisey play. I think we can do one line in the sand play per show here without getting too crazy. But it is worth noting he is a legitimate value for this one, and I don't know that anyone's really truly going to notice that. But he could be a sneaky hammer play, especially when you have Cam Corhen all over the place with his minutes. He played just 20 against Syracuse, just 20 against SMU. But if you look at the pattern there, 33 against UNC, 20 against SMU, 33 against Miami, 20 against Syracuse. So I guess Cam Corhen should play 33. And if that's the case, he's a great play at 5'6". And Notre Dame's interior is absolutely atrocious. So we should see some Corhen. We should see some Diaz Graham, that, perhaps some Papa Conte even. But interior-wise, they're susceptible. So Corhen at 5'6" is actually pretty interesting there if you want to follow the pattern that he's been on minutes-wise. But the DVP is there for him as well to support as a play. For Notre Dame, Matt Oloko is back. They still started Sir Mohammed, even with Matt back, but I think that's probably going to flip at some point. Matt played 19 minutes. Sir played 23. So expect Matt to get back in the starting lineup here probably sooner rather than later. Matt is 5K, so he's okay if you want to go there. He dropped 1,100 after he put up just 2 fantasy points against SMU in that 19-minute, and that was a blowout loss for Notre Dame. But we've seen him be a steady performer, scoring 20-plus fantasy points. So he's at least in consideration at this price of 5K if starting. If not, not really interested. Still like Sir Mohammed long-term. With all the value pieces that everybody's going to be looking at, a 1% Sir Mohammed also makes some sense. So there's all this different GPP quality value at our fingertips and just no real pay-ups to get to actually take advantage of it, which has kind of been the theme of the last 2 months, honestly. Every time I'm on these shows lately, I've been telling you, no Janai Broom, no Cooper Flagg. They're on the afternoon and night slates. We just don't have that firepower on this slate, which means 10-gamer, Dawson Garcia, 50% owned. What a world we live in. All right, that is the slate breakdown here. Let me pull up some Prize Pick stuff, core, all that good stuff for us. Start FanDuel. So the FanDuel core, FanDuel does have Janai Broom, and he's 9.7K there. And when you look at the FanDuel pricing, he's the most expensive by a mile. The next line is Sakai Zeigler, 8K. Great Osabor, because the Washington-Iowa game is on this slate. That's right. The Huskies are playing Iowa. Let's go. And then you have Peyton Sandfort at 7.9. So you really have to play Broom on FanDuel because he's really the only pay-up available. And he was very low on last slate and didn't quite pan out. But against Georgia, I would expect him to be very chalky and to have a monster double-double. So core-wise on FanDuel, Janai Broom, obviously. RJ Melendez, who is under 5K on FanDuel. I'm running my Melendez play into the sun until he gets priced appropriately. And then Nate Heisey, who is under 5K there as well, just as the expected starter. Give me those 2 value pieces. You probably don't need double value on FanDuel this time, but I'm going to want to play Great Osabor as well against Iowa in a dream matchup for him. On DraftKings, the core currently Dawson Garcia. Similar situation to Janai Broom on FanDuel. He's just the premier pay-up, and really the only one that we can sit here and say for sure is going to put up or should put up a big game, and we feel confidently in. RJ Melendez, and then whoever starts there for Keshawn Gilbert, which I do have as Nate Heisey at the moment. So pretty much the same core on DraftKings and FanDuel, except swap Broom for Garcia, swap Garcia for Broom. All right, prize picks. I have 2 right now. The board's pretty light, so in the next 4 to 5 hours, there'll be a lot more, and I'll update that. But as of now, Caleb Grill over 12.5 points. Caleb Grill is just super base scoring machine for Missouri. How about Missouri, huh? Jesus, Missouri. They had a nice first year under Dennis Gates, made the tournament, ran into a Ivy League team that kind of sent them packing, right? Then he's 8-24 last year. Really rough go of it. The Sean East, Noah Carter, Nick Honor team, it was a nice roster, but didn't get it done. They're 20-6. They are a 20-win team, and we haven't even hit March 1st yet. Coming off a convincing 110-98 win over Alabama. Coach Gates had to call a timeout late and say, please do not storm the court, students. Please do not storm the court. We believe we should beat Alabama. All class there. I think they should have stormed the court. I like the court storming stuff. But holy shit, this Missouri team is awesome. And they are going to layeth the smacketh down on Arkansas. It is a road game for them, but expect Caleb Grill to score 20+ real points. So we'll take the over 12.5 there. In any book you can find that prop, please slam the over. It is a very advantageous one. And then Kylan Boswell under 4 rebounds for Illinois. Guess who Illinois has to play this weekend, folks? The Duke Blue Devils. This is a rough time to have to play Duke. Why is it rough? Well, because you don't have Morris Johnson. Your interior has fallen apart. You are sicker than, your players are all sick. You have Tomislav Ivicevic, who is hanging out with an unclean human, I guess, and getting mono and every other illness under the sun. I don't know, man. Illinois is in trouble all of a sudden. And I still really like Illinois long term. I had this argument with, I think I mentioned this last show, with Johnny, how I thought the window for Illinois was wide open for the next 2 to 3 years, as long as they kept their freshmen and sophomores intact. But this year's quickly falling apart for them. And they are, I don't know. This feels like they're going to get smacked in the mouth. This is technically, where is this at? MSG, right? Yeah, it is. So this is a neutral at the Garden, but I don't foresee Illinois having much success. And I do not see Kylan Boswell grabbing 5+ rebounds against that Duke interior. So I will take the under 4 rebounds there for Kylan Boswell. I'd actually be shocked if that number was still there by morning. That'll probably fall to 3.5. I'm going to be looking for that one on books as well. Really like Duke in that spot against Illinois. I think that's going to be a non-competitive game. I hope it's competitive, but bad time for Illinois to be facing Duke with everybody sick and Morris Johnson with a broken wrist. Best bets, I have 2 right now. Louisiana Tech money line. They are taking on Western Kentucky. I absolutely love Louisiana Tech. It's been a disappointing season for them. They're 18-9, which is still good, but it's not, obviously in the CUSA, it's not good enough. They're not going to get an at-large bid or anything. They need to win this game, and they need to win out. They have Western Kentucky, Sam Houston State, New Mexico State, and UTEP left. It's a pretty favorable end to their season. Obviously, Liberty stands in their way for a CUSA crown in the tournament. Middle Tennessee has some dudes. Jacksonville State has some dudes. There's several teams here who are, playing extremely well that stand in the way. It's going to be actually a pretty fun CUSA tournament, but I do like Louisiana Tech. Just the money line. They're +1.5 on the road against Western Kentucky, but I just like them to win outright. Give me that +110 there as opposed to -110. And then Wofford -2.5 versus East Tennessee State. Wofford, they don't have Max Klesman anymore. He's on Wisconsin. Maybe you knew that, but they're still a fun team. They're nowhere near their glory days of a couple years ago with Fletcher McGee and company. They're 15-13. But East Tennessee State, it's a home game against them. East Tennessee State's kind of just an okay team themselves under Brooks Savage. They're 16-12. Last time out. They did win over UNC Greensboro at home 65-49, so they have some pep in their step, but this is a difficult environment, I think, for them to go on the road and beat Wofford. Now, last time they played, it was a home game against Wofford. They lost to them by 3 at home. So now they're going on the road. I expect Wofford to win this one by 3+. So give me Wofford -2.5. We'll do some more research into the night and load up the betting tracker by morning and in the Discord. So if you're a part of that, be aware. There's lots coming down the pipeline for myself, Frank Brank, Mike Randall, everybody else on the FTN staff. We have lots going on. It's going to be a tremendously profitable weekend. I feel great about that. Ryan says, so Yannick, 2 quick ones, and Iowa State cheap guards combined for 15 fantasy points. Can't wait. Yeah. Sounds about right. If they combine for 15, that actually doesn't sound that bad, really, at min price, depending on who you play. But yeah, I am not confident in Yannick not getting foul trouble there. But, that's just a great GPP look, man. A great GPP look, because he will break the slate if he can stay out there. All right, so that'll wrap it up. We also, as always, will have coverage for the other 2 slates as well. The afternoon slate has some serious, legit games on it. Obviously Auburn is there for Janai Broome, but Washington plays Iowa at Iowa. That should be a fun one. North Carolina, perhaps they've woken up a little bit. They looked extremely good against NC State. Oklahoma State plays Kansas. We know Oklahoma State's a fantasy-friendly group, so maybe some Kansas action there, although think they might have quit on their season, perhaps. Clemson versus SMU, that's got some juice to it. Baylor at Colorado, that'll test those freshmen in that environment. And then Kentucky versus Alabama. The implied for Alabama in that game is 95.5 points. It's a total of 182.5, I believe. Ridiculous. Alabama playing Kentucky. I think they played once before, right? My memory serves correct. They already played this year, and it was already one of the highest totals on the slate once before. Yeah. 102.97 win for Alabama last time, and I believe that total was 184, if I remember correctly. And everybody went nuts there. Grant Nelson, Mark Sears. So expect fireworks on that one. That will probably be one of the higher-owned games on the slate. And then Florida plays LSU. We'll see if we can keep our streak going of Damian Collins games there, because he has been awesome for LSU. Night slate has that Illinois-Duke game. St. Mary's playing Gonzaga. That'll be a war. St. Mary's winning the WCC by 2 games currently, I believe. Gonzaga is going to have to win the WCC tournament. They'll still get in the big dance. Don't let me set it up like that. But they're going to have to win the WCC tournament because they're not going to win the regular season, barring a collapse by St. Mary's. They need to win this game. And it is a home game for the Zags, for what it's worth. Butler playing DePaul. We know DePaul games have been fun. Missouri plays Arkansas. That's going to be fantasy-friendly. Missouri is just awesome right now. And then California playing Stanford as the hammer game. Maxime Reynaud absolutely decimated the DFS industry by busting as a high-priced, chalky piece. I got a little lucky and faded him because I didn't like the build with him, but I do expect him to absolutely destroy Cal. So we'll have to look to him as well. And then a gut check game, BYU versus Arizona. Arizona is a small favorite there at home. BYU playing their asses off right now. Hashtag Walt's guy, Richie Sanders. If you haven't seen him play before, this will be your opportunity to do so. He is awesome. All right. Appreciate it, everyone who continues to support the show. Please make sure on your way out, if you haven't done so already, hit the like button there on YouTube. Also, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Hit that notification button. Anytime the show goes live, you'll get word about it. We are doing the Friday night shows continually, but daytime shows on Tuesday and Wednesday, roughly between 10 and 11 a.m. on PST time. Please make sure that you guys are checking that out. And then on social media at DubDeuces85 on Twitter /X and every other social media platform. And additionally at FTN Fantasy for the home site, ftnfantasy.com. All the links below, all the prop shops, all the pricing pages, everything you need to check out FTN in the links below in the box there. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you very much. Let's have a big weekend. Green screens galore and those window trips. All ours. Take care, guys.